Hey guys, just give me a sec to clamp this down. Want to remove the echo. I'm just gonna wait for you guys to pop up. Just want to confirm that we are live and you guys can see me. I'll do it quicker this time than the last time. Running a solo gig's a bit tough because I think we're live on YouTube. We should, in theory, be live on Facebook. And yeah, we should also be live on TikTok. Sorry about that, guys. I was just making sure we're live on every single platform because I'm running a single person studio. I have to make sure everything's okay, but I think everything's okay. I'm getting there a little bit, getting to understand how streaming works. But hi guys, welcome to this live. It's meant to be a Q&A, which means I am going to desperately need you guys to give me questions. Reez Yezra, hey man, how you doing? Welcome to the live, Reez. It's a pleasure to have you. Just wondering if you have any question for me. I definitely love questions. There's been a lot that's happened, isn't it, this week in politics, in normal news, crime news, courts news. There's so much stuff to talk about. I want to get into this thing whereby ever so often we discuss, about stories that are really dominating the news. Mr. DJ2689 is asking about Bellarmine Chatunga. Wow, I've bitten that horse a lot this week, haven't I? Well, the question was Ano Sungwere, and that question's come from YouTube. And he is arrested already, that's my understanding. He already is arrested. I suppose perhaps the question would be what's going to happen next. Well, he's going to be back in court on March the 3rd. So that will be for a bail application. It's very difficult to call it at the moment because when you speak to South African prosecutors, right, they're extremely confident that we've got our guy, we've got our man, and we're going to get him on multiple different charges. When you speak to Zimbabwean lawyers, on the other hand, they tend to tell you that, hey, we don't think Chatunga's going to go anywhere. We think South Africa bundled this. They don't have the weapon. They are relying on a lot of suspicion. But suspicion, even a lot of suspicion, is not what you need for a conviction. You need evidence. South African prosecutors say, we are convinced we've got him, we are going to get him. So it's one of those where we're going to have to see on March the 3rd who's going to blink first. There's obviously like those things I've spoken about where there's conversations between Harare and Pretoria to see how to help Chatunga Mugabe. So this one's hard to call because there are geopolitical connotations involved. And really, to be fair, it's hard to call. The police did bungle the investigation a little bit, leaving the crime scene unsecure, then coming back later. And then, as is almost always the case with South African authorities, not necessarily doing things by the book or ticking all of their boxes, making sure that all of their T's have a cross, all of their I's have a dot. They didn't do that like they do in a lot of investigations. So that one's hard to call. Let me just switch over to check on TikTok if we've got any comments. Wiseman, hey man, how are you doing? It's good to have you here. I can see you. I can see a lot of other guys who've joined in on TikTok as well. For some reason, I still can't figure out how to integrate the questions from TikTok and the questions from YouTube and Facebook to bring them at once. So Mr. DJ, he's explained further that he's asking if there'll be a full conviction because there's no weapon, so no weapon, no case. So not entirely, it's like, think of it this way. If you unalive someone, and I have to watch how I phrase this because we've also on TikTok live and they're strict about some words. But if you unalive someone and police never find the body, in theory, you could say, well, there is no unaliving of anyone because there's no body. But you can still go down for unaliving someone even if the police never find a body. So no weapon, no case isn't necessarily there is a case because there's a victim with a wound that's come from a pew-pew. And there's a lot of blood on the scene, there's gunshot residue, and there's a shell casing, and there's witnesses that had the pew-pew go off. So No weapon, no case, not really, because there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that can prove at least what's happened. I think where it might get sticky is whose hand was the pew pew in and who pulled the trigger. Those are the important questions that would really, you'd think they would need that for a conviction. But people have been sent to jail on circumstantial evidence before, so we can't really say that's off the table. So it's something that could happen. Tinashe, not a question, but I just want to wish the Chevrons all the best in India. Yeah, I think we're all supporting the Chevrons. Please do not mind that I'm wearing a West Indies kit. I lost another bet, right? If you followed a couple of days ago, I was wearing the South African kit, and that was because I was convinced India would beat South Africa. I lost that bet, and my wife made me wear the South African top, the Proteas top, for the rest of the day. I should have worn it for 3 days, but I eventually negotiated that down. I then was so sure, like I was so convinced that Zimbabwe were gonna beat West Indies. I wasn't convinced by the Windies. They've lost a lot of big guns. I was like, nah, Zimbabwe, we're gonna wallop the West Indies, one beaten in the tournament. But we then didn't win. So now I've been made to wear a West Indies top. So I'm on a bit of a bad run. But I wish the Chevrons all the best. I was a bit concerned about a lot of abuse that was directed at Msakio, who dropped the two catches. That was sad. Cricket is a tough game. I've played cricket myself. I continue to play cricket at an amateur level in the UK, and it's not an easy sport. And sometimes bad things happen in games. Think of it this way: Ben Stokes conceded like 24 runs off the final over to lose the World Cup against the West Indies in India for England. The very same Ben Stokes 2 years later was the one who was leading the charge and basically won the World Cup for England in England. He was also instrumental in that innings in Headingley that basically allowed England to draw that Ashes series 2-2 and stop England from losing the Ashes. So a player can have one bad game, it shouldn't warrant abuse, but up the chevrons and definitely hope they will win. Um, Let me go to other questions. That was weird. Why did they leave the crime scene? I never quite understood how the SAPS handled that one. Like you wouldn't imagine or think that police will go to the crime scene, then leave it unattended, then come back and get more evidence. Because to be fair, whatever evidence that they get when they come back a second time, a competent lawyer can just argue that that evidence could have been planted by anybody or something else could have happened in that period. Because the time that the police left it unattended, anything could have happened. Somebody could have taken the gun away. Somebody could have taken the pew pew away. Somebody could have entered the place. Somebody could have left the place. Somebody could have entered and put sirens on that black BMW. So that was a bit of bungling. And it's a theme that you tend to find a lot with South African authorities when it comes to investigations. They just tend to bungle them a lot. They just make a lot of these amateur mistakes. I wasn't live here talking about this yesterday, but I was on TikTok for the YouTube guys, and we spoke a lot. I had somebody who brought up Shepard Bushiri and how South Africa failed to extradite him back to South Africa. And obviously, I worked for and worked with Bushiri for a very long time. And I happened to be in Malawi at the time, so I've got like lots of experience about what happened there. I know the mistakes South Africa made. I mean, I was tweeting about the mistakes they were making long before that judgment came out a couple of months ago. So I brought that up as well, where South African authorities tend to make a lot of elementary mistakes when they're doing the investigations. I see that when I follow the Senzo Meyiwa case, for instance. I see that when I follow any kind of trial that happens on TV, you almost look at it and think you are making juvenile mistakes that in a competent court, lawyers could take you to town for. So that's one thing that happens a lot. So let me see if there's other questions. Let me check if we've got any question on TikTok. Our TikTok viewers haven't asked anything. Okay, yeah, they have. Right, we'll get there. There's a question from Wiseman. Are you still in good books with Hubert Angel? He said Hubert Angle. I'm sure he meant Hubert Angel. Good books, no. Bad books, no. When I left Shepard Bushiri and ECG in October 2021 to join the Daily Mirror in the UK, anytime you leave a place, it's not always going to be on good blood. We didn't have massive differences with Bushiri. We just stopped seeing things the same way. And I, again, had what was a better offer, which was to work journalism full time, with the Daily Mirror. And at the same time, that's when I then enrolled for a PhD at Bournemouth University. So I wouldn't have been able to juggle the three. But I would lie if I say he was happy that I left. He was unhappy that I left, which meant things were a bit uncomfortable. when I wrote a series of tweets a couple of years ago, mentioning people that had been instrumental in my life, I did speak about Hubert Angel and the influence he had in my life, right? He paid for half of my school fees when I came to do an MA in the UK when I was doing my master's in documentary journalism. He paid the £5,000 I needed to register for my PhD at Bournemouth. He pulled out of paying my fees along the way when we had differences. But it made sense because we were no longer traveling the same path or seeing things the same way. We went through years of not talking with Property Bay Angel, like complete years where we had basically almost become strangers, but not really estranged. So I don't have a grudge with him. I don't have a beef with him. I appreciate the path he's played in my life. I am still very close with some people that go to his church, Blessing Manyara, Bevan, Pastor Femi, etc. I was very close to those guys. So nothing ever really like changed. So we aren't in good books, but I can't say when bad books. I think we're just okay. I think he lives his life. I think I live mine. I didn't do anything wrong to him. He didn't do anything wrong to me. So that's where it is. Is the victim pressing charges? I take it you're asking if the guy who was pew-pewed at the Mugabe house, I don't think he has a choice. There's some crimes that the state will press charges on your behalf. So, for instance, a person who's unalived cannot press charges for themselves. A person who has been pew-pewed and is in critical condition also, they they can't press charges. It's not up to them. And there are instances where even if someone doesn't want to press charges, the state is going to have like a significant interest in that case, so they're going to press charges anyway. And this is one of them where there is no way you're going to get PPU'd and say I don't want to press charges, and the state's going to fold back and say yeah, well, it's okay, it's a private matter, because it's not. Also because the use of pew-pews and any kind of firearms is obviously governed by law. It's not like, oh, he gave me an extra teaspoon of sugar, I can get sugar in a supermarket. There are a lot of crimes that will be tied to this and a lot of regulatory issues. So the charges will press ahead whether or not the victim likes it or not. Just checking if there's any other comments on TikTok. Why do you think South African law enforcement is clumsy with their investigations? You've judged. I'd always take that back to how they handled a number of high-profile investigations. If you follow the Senzo Meyiwa case, this is like a lot of issues there, a lot of mistakes, elementary mistakes that were made in how they conducted the first interviews, the second interviews, how the evidence was gathered. Even the fact that one of the weapons used there, they eventually came across the ballistics by chance before that weapon was about to be destroyed, and that helped them link it to a different kind of crime. Had that weapon been destroyed when it was scheduled to be destroyed, they'd have never made that connection. So that's a bit clumsy. With regards to like the Bushiri issue, which is the one where I obviously knew a lot of things, right? I was front and center to that. You had instances where at one point the Department of Justice sent documents in Afrikaans to Malawi. Afrikaans is not even an official language in Malawi. The magistrate couldn't read it. The prosecutors couldn't read it. That just made it difficult, and there was a postponement on that particular day. They also initially tried to have him extradited on a treaty signed between Malawi and South Africa when Kamuzu Banda was president. How long ago that is, right? I think it was a treaty from the 70s. And the elementary thing was that treaty, it was signed by the president, but it was never ratified. It never became law in Malawi. So essentially, when he was first arrested, when they first put in that extradition request, his lawyers this is basically showed up and argued that this is an illegal detention and an illegal appearance. This guy's been arrested on the basis of a law that doesn't exist in Malawi. And you would think that they would have known that. I also happened to spend a lot of time with the director of prosecutions at the time, Dr. Steve Kayuni in Malawi, and he, via mutual friend, he often echoed a lot of frustration in terms of how either South Africa didn't observe correct procedure, or they sent incorrect documents, or they weren't interested in reading elementary Malawian law. They just dumped things on his lap and expected those things to be done. So South African authorities do handle investigations clumsily, a lot of high-profile ones. With this particular one, like I said, they left the crime scene unattended, and people were able to walk in and out. When a crime has been committed, the integrity of a crime scene is very important. It's one of the first things that you want to protect, because you need to always be able to have that crime scene to have its integrity intact in case the defense wants to poke holes about anything that you found. Now, if the crime scene's been open and closed and random people have gone in, moved vehicles out, put vehicles back in, you're going to really really, really struggle. Even if eventually, imagine he comes out and says, I actually left the weapon on a kitchen table or kitchen counter, but there were 10, 15 people that came in after you had already arrested me, so one of them could have picked it up. What then would you say about that? So that's one of the things. What became of your religious beliefs after you left ECG? I never had religious beliefs even when I was in ECG. I was always openly atheistic. I posted about it, I spoke about it. Religion does not make sense to me. That's a personal choice. I'm a student of all religions. I can bet bottom dollar most of the time. I know and read the Bible better than an average person because it fascinates me. But religion doesn't make sense to me. And I was always like that. It used to be a bone of contention sometimes in ECG because people didn't like the fact that I was an agnostic who was working in an organization, but I wasn't working in the church, which is why I only ever went to an actual service once. It wasn't a Sunday service, it was a Saturday one, which is like a partners meeting of sorts. He didn't want me there on Sunday services because of that, because I wasn't Christian. So never had those beliefs. Do you think those guys are used by God, Sekwana Kwakwa prophets? I think because I don't think they're invisible men in the sky that can make things happen. I just all think it's all hogwash, but I tend to keep my opinions to myself about that because people get very finicky about religion. I mean, members of my family are really, really big on religion. My sister-in-law is one of the biggest gospel singers in the country. My mom, is starting to be a pastor. I have people that go to Makandiwa's church who are in my family. My kids were baptized in Makandiwa's church. So tend to keep my opinions to myself. I mean, after all, like I say, and so obviously the last time I can talk about it because I don't think it's always relevant. I always feel that I preach the gospel of I don't know. Maybe someday a burning bush will talk to me. Maybe a snake will talk to me. If that happens, I will utterly change my mind about religion. Do you consider yourself a liberal or conservative? None. I don't think I think I tend to just move with conscience too many times. So I call right and wrong without necessarily being ascribed to any side. I need to go back to YouTube because I haven't really. Those are all TikTok questions. Let's go back here. Get this: 3 people in the house. The victim says, "I don't know who pulled the trigger." So why isn't the lawyer asking the prosecutor how they can pin it on Bellarmine? 2 people can't pull a trigger. So my view on this is the lawyers can't really ask anything from the police until it gets to trial, or maybe during the bail application they could bring that up that hey, you don't even know who pulled the trigger itself. But then there's also something in criminal law, right? In the UK they call it joint enterprise, and I think in South Africa it's a doctrine or principle of acting in common purpose. So while 2 people cannot physically pull the trigger, 2 people can be convicted of unaliving someone, regardless of who pulled the trigger. An example that I know about, which is quite close to my heart because the story I worked on, it's still there if you read the Daily Examiner here in the UK, or if you just go on the Daily Examiner and then you look for baby-faced Sheffield Hart who became a cold-blooded killer. That story is about a kid who was called Campita. The Campita was his surname. And he was involved in the unaliving of a lawyer in Sheffield. Now, there were 3 or 4 people involved in that scuffle, including one of the lawyer's friends and friends of this kid who was there. This kid isn't the one who had a weapon. There was another kid there with a weapon, and that kid is the one that pulled the trigger. But ultimately, the jury ruled that everyone who was there, Kambira and the other guy was convicted, they were acting in common purpose. The only other person who was acquitted there was a person who was severely autistic and who couldn't be held criminally liable. So he is the one that got away with it. Everybody else who was there at the scene was charged and convicted of the same crime, which is joint enterprise. Um, if me and Prof. Changamira, our editor here at Dagap, if we went to a house to rob a house, and Prof. Changamira stayed outside, and I went inside the house, Prof. Changamira doesn't know what I'm doing in the house, but we've all agreed to go and rob the house. If I then unalive someone in there, both me and him would still get done for that. So there's that little complication. But like you said, that victim doesn't know who's pulled the trigger, so he doesn't know who's pew-pewed him, right? So that on its own is a very good argument that the defense could lean on. Um, but police certainly can, they can arrest you, and they can, like I said, they can try and rely on circumstantial evidence. And when you speak to the prosecutors from SA, and I spoke to two of them more involved in the case, and they're really, really upbeat. Like, nah, he's gonna go down. It doesn't matter. He's making excuses, but he's gonna go down. We're gonna make an example of him. That's one of the things I was told. So, but you speak to lawyers in Zim, or you read some of the stuff. Rex Midzi, Ambassador Amos Midzi's son, he put up something on Twitter the other day explaining about what he thinks are the loopholes on this case that should allow Chitunga to get away with it. So yeah, let me go to another question. Do you really think the constitutional amendment will pass with all the backlash? I mean, ZANU PF is very daring, but to those extremes, I've always known ZANU PF to do what they want when they want, and probably have like a sideshow dressing for the sake of it. I think it's become clear, regardless of the president saying he doesn't want to be in power, that he does want to be in power, which, like I said, it makes it a bit complex because I've asked him in 2022, I've asked him in 2023, I've asked him in 2024, and I've asked him in 2026, right? If he intends to stay beyond 2028. And each of those times, his reaction has been with increased annoyance and irritation. That you keep asking me the same question. I have already said it when you've asked me, and also in public, that I am going home after 2028. I am retiring. I've said this many, many times. But you take that, which is what he's saying it in public. And like I said, he's saying that to me as well. But you take that and you look at all the actions around him. Everything has been moved to make sure that he continues as president. It used to be subtle. Now it's not subtle anymore. Now it's abundantly obvious that he wants to stay in power. He's not even hiding it. On the other hand, the natural successor to him, right, Constantino Chiwenga, is under increased and renewed attack left, right, and center, including by people you'd look at in the party and think, these are small boys. They're still attacking the president, or the vice president, I mean. Things that didn't even happen when ED was vice president. There were attacks towards the end of it, but they were veiled. We have Twitter accounts, non-Twitter accounts that are run and paid for by people who are basically the president's runners now. Accounts paid for by, for example, by Paul Tungwara, right? Who pays Mfekane, Tendai Zinyama, and all these other accounts. Accounts paid for by Wignall, for instance, right? Openly attacking the vice president. And it never sunk to those stages when ED was vice president himself. So it stands to reason to any man with logic that this cannot be happening without his blessing. Allies of Chiwenga are targeted and removed from key positions. Some are sent to jail. Some are beaten while they are in jail, right? So he says one thing, but clearly they want to do something else. And thinking that they're not trying to do something else would be a little bit naive. So if the question is, do I think they're going to go ahead? I think they will. Why? Because I think they'll feel, where is the resistance going to come from? When ED was vice president, the army was almost a uniform unit acting in common purpose, except for Perence Shiri to a certain degree and General Sanyatwe to a certain degree, right? And we did see that play out with 2nd Presidential Guard Battalion soldiers firing at the infantry brigade that had taken up offensive positions against their barracks, right? Just before they put Ngaba under house arrest. That is where we get that exchange of fire close to Zivarasekwa. That's because Sanyatwe wasn't aware of what was happening and wasn't in support of it initially. He was convinced and persuaded later to go with the flow with the coup, but he wasn't. The coup itself was timed for Perence Shiri being in Dubai. So he wasn't necessarily around. He wasn't Air Commodore. I think Elson Moy was deputizing for him at the time. And he also took convincing, but being that he was in Dubai, there was no way he could have lifted any fighter jets to counter what the 2 infantry brigade was doing, right, out of Inkom barracks. They're the ones, the mechanized brigade out of Inkom were the ones who were doing the coup, right? It was basically a coup done by 1 regiment, straight up. Had special forces, 1 commando, had they countered would have had a civil war. Had Perensiri managed to get fighter jets to take off and boom, boom, the tanks. The soldiers in tanks would have gone out of the tanks and ran for their dear life, and the coup would have been reversed. There was a significant fear within the army as that coup happens that it could be reversed, which is why one of the first things they did was to go to the police's paramilitary headquarters and basically put them under siege because paramilitary officers in the police are trained almost the standard of soldiers. So the army then, however, is now different from the army now. Mugabe was very hesitant to move his generals around. He was very hesitant to promote, demote, or retire generals. By the time the coup happened, Chiwenga's contract had actually expired. So he was technically not really CDF. He was CDF in principle, but didn't even have a contract that said he was one. Mugabe was hesitant to renew that or to not necessarily renew it. Emerson Mnangagwa has been on the forefront of trying to put so many changes in the army that it's almost difficult for the army to even come together in common purpose and even try a coup. So that's another factor. The amendments themselves read like they are trying to make sure that that instance where the army stands up to defend the constitution cannot happen again. That looks like somebody who's preparing for 2030 for me. So then the question is, who's going to stop them? The EU has just removed a bunch of sanctions on Zimbabwe. They've removed those on the day after Blessed Mhlanga has appeared at UN Watch bemoaning how the human rights situation has gone bad. So definitely help's not going to come from the EU. The Americans are busy. The rest of the African continent's got fatigue about Zimbabwe. So not only are they daring, in my view, but there's nothing to stop them. Because nothing short of a coup from Chiwenga at the minute looks like it can save him. Let me go to the next question if I didn't miss anything. Just hold on. I'll come back to TikTok. So guys on TikTok, just hold on. I just want to do YouTube because I gave TikTok guys a bit of a bit of attention. Let's go to the next one. How do we know you aren't an operative yourself? Well, it depends. One, you can go and look up with the Civil Service Commission. You'd find the names of government operatives and this and that. But I don't know if that matters. What should matter is the content that's coming out of my mouth. So how you see me, if you see me as an operative, cool. If you see me as one who isn't, yeah, that's also cool, man. It will be up to you, really. What can Zimbabwe's youth do now with the situation in Zim? I don't know. I think if at all Zimbabwe's youths are a collective homogeneous group, then they'll need to come together and decide what they want to do. Because I am a youth as well. But Tendai Zinyama is a youth. That kid got cars and money from work now. Mukungunugwa is a youth as well, isn't he? Comrade Shangri-La is a youth. Comrade Chabata was against the 23rd Amendments. He's also a youth. Giftos Talos is a youth. So Zimbabwe's youth aren't a single homogeneous group that act in common purpose, that have got shared aspirations, shared goals, etc. They're not. You could say, well, the majority of the youth, take away the ones who are in the feeding trough. And again, I think it will be up to them. My work is just as a journalist. I play my part by investigating stories, telling you stories, doing these analysis that you guys really love. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes I call it correctly, sometimes I don't. It's what I know and what I'm good at. I don't know what an engineer in Blawayo can do to stop this. I don't know what a doctor in Harare can do. And I don't know what a youth in ZANU-PF who doesn't agree with this can do as well. So the youth will have to dig deeper for answers. It's difficult for me to give them because I don't have the answers myself, because every other avenue I think of looks like it's a dead end. The only thing I suppose that gives me hope, and I spoke about this on TikTok yesterday, is that I remember when Mugabe was so drunk on power that his wife told us that even after he dies, he would rule from the grave and she would go to his grave and come back with a list of cabinet appointments. I remember listening to that speech and feeling so helpless, like this nightmare is not going to end. This power-hungry thug is going to remain in power even after he dies. And it took me a while to sit down and say, wait, Maynard, this is illogical. He can't rule from the grave. Nobody rules from the grave. But it sounded so believable at the time because they looked like there's no way to stop Mugabe. Mugabe was shaking Emerson Mnangagwa like a rag doll, like this. Like literally. He was mocking him in public. He was insulting him. Grace was doing the same thing. I mean, who forgets that speech where Grace went to town about, Edie's got so many kids, got so many baby mamas. He's loose. He doesn't have morals. It said Mugabe only has eyes for me. She went after Edie like that. It was bad. And at the time, he looked like he was the only person who could finally give us some form of change that we wanted. So when I feel helpless now that there's no way we can stop 2030, I also remember that under Mugabe, it looked like nobody could stop him. So maybe he can be stopped, right? So we go to the next question. Tell us about the Hubert Angel today's scandal. I don't really know much about it. What I do know is it's a hoax. Parts of it certainly for sure today are a hoax, right? So what I saw was a banner that said Hubert Angel is fled Zimbabwe or he's missing. He's not missing in Zimbabwe. He was at Munumtapa at 4 p.m., right? And I know that because I had a contact who went to Munumtapa because I was trying to source something regarding the communication between Harare and Pretoria about Chitunga's appearance on March the 3rd. And as he was leaving, the president left. It must have been around 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. Zimbabwean time, when he called to give me an update that the president was leaving Munumtapa. Well, I was surprised because Emerson Mnangagwa doesn't really work from Munumtapa. He tends to work from State House, right? Munumtapa was Mugabe's thing. Mnangagwa tends to work a lot from State House instead. But today he spent a lot of time at Munumtapa and then went to State House after. And Hubert Angel was there and had been there. And when he was talking about it, saying the president just left, but Prophet Hubert Angel is leaving as well. So he's certainly not missing. He's in Zimbabwe. That part of the story is a hoax. The rest of it, I don't really know. It's something that I'll probably need to go in and really look at and find the details. But as far as I know, it's a hoax. The only part of the story that I know to be true is I know he hasn't been in the best of books with people within ZANU-PF. Those prophecies, those speeches that took aim at Tungwarara, different politicians that spoke about corruption and this and that, they didn't make him any friends at all, right? So that part is difficult. Right? If you go on Twitter today, there's even videos trending where people are talking about when Angel spoke about you don't need to get an extension before you finish your mandate, right? If you are leading, you need to be able to finish what you said you'd finish in the time you said you'd finish, right? I don't know if it's a recent speech. I only saw it as a retweet. That, again, is not going to sell well with your auxiliary Mnangagwas, for instance, who really want 2030 to happen, right? Who foresee this future of Tagire as president, Auxilia as vice president, and then Tagire replaced by Auxilia, and then Auxilia replaced by Dambudzo, right? You guys tend to call him Emerson Jr., but his actual name is actually Dambudzo. Emerson Jr. is the guy who's the DJ. That's the Emerson Jr. The other guy is Dambudzo. But that's, a small issue that is sidetracking. So that wouldn't have won him any friends. The consequences of that, I don't know how far it will go. But the part that says he fled Zimbabwe is not true. That part is a hoax. Mr. DJ, is it even worth to stay in Zim? Things aren't changing soon, nor will they ever. I would say yes, in terms of, is it worth it to stay? I mean, ultimately, home is the best. You want to stay at home, and home is the best. I came here, and I've now said it on a number of days. I came here to go to school, right? To do my MA, then I finished my MA, I want to do my PhD. The big dream has always been for me to acquire as many skills and experience as I can. I love that I'm shooting in the Premier League. I love that I'm shooting in the Champions League. But my big plan after all of that is to take that knowledge back to Zim. I want to open the first university in Zimbabwe that teaches journalism, media studies, media production, basically a school of journalism only. At the minute, if you want to be a journalist in Zimbabwe, you have to go to the Christian College of Southern Africa, but they offer a diploma. If not, you have to go to a school and do something like communications or something like that. So you find that there are no schools that are training journalists, at least maybe to the standard that you'd find by in the UK of something called the National Council for Training of Journalists, NCTJ. So for you to work most jobs, you need an NCTJ qualification, or at least you need to pass media law and ethics exams by the NCTGA. And largely because the UK has got a lot more repressive laws when it comes to the media, it is very easy to go to jail in the UK for being a journalist because there are so many laws about what you can report and can't report. For that reason, I even move around with this, right? This is the journalist big handbook. If you practice journalism in the UK without this, you're gonna go to jail. It's that bad. So the people that help you, that you can't quite see, but right at the bottom here it says NCTJ. Yeah, we don't have something like that in Zim. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Now, relating this back to the question that you said, right, which is it even worth it to stay in Zim? Things aren't changing. I would say ultimately yes, because it's home, and no place will ever be like home. I lived for a long time in South Africa. You guys know my wife is South African. I lived for a time with her. I left with her. The UK is inadvertently better. There is no open hostility. Um, but again, it's still not home. So we can't always. I'd say it's worth it because it's home. And when I'm done with what I need to do, I am going to come back home. God knows what the price will be for running that gap and doing the things, that I've done. We've already lost somebody, at Dagap, and it's you operating in an environment of threats, right? When we're doing Tatina Mavetera's PhD investigation, for instance, and several other stories that we've done, Delish Nguaya, etc. And it's threats that are credible. I've said it before that it's so easy to get to me if they really want to, because in the UK, everyone's on the electoral register. So they can find you that way, right? Or they can pay someone at a traffic management company and look up your plates and therefore get your address via the DVLA, right? If they have your address, they can pay somebody who came here on a COS. They can come to my house, poke me with a sharp object, take a train to Birmingham, and be out of the country before the police even have an idea what's happening. So we operate under those conditions, but I'm still going to go back home because home is home. What's going on with Jonathan Moyo about the issue of bills? So Jonathan Moyo has clearly now changed sides, which is hilarious to a degree because we've gone full circle with Jonathan Moyo again, by the way. So we've gone from after the coup, Jonathan Moyo is so angry and he's so pissed off and he hates ZANU-PF, he hates the military, he hates Chiwenga. In fact, it's Jonathan Moyo who first tells us that Chiwenga's PhD is bogus. He says he casts doubt about the veracity of that PhD from UKZN. Jonathan Moyo does that. He apologizes later to Chiwenga very quickly, right? And stops mentioning Chiwenga in any kind of bad light, but just focuses on ZANU-PF is bad, ED is bad. We go through that stage where Jonathan Moyo is really supporting, Chamisa for the 2018 elections, and he's working with Grace Mugabe, and everything is fine. Then there's a time when Mtinidi is going to start a party and this and that. Then Jonathan Moyo apparently steals money for T-shirts. They end up fighting over my T-shirts and this and that. And then Moyo falls out with Jelas Mawarire and falls out with Mai Mugabe. And there's a nasty exchange. And then Mai Mugabe blocks Jonathan Moyo. But Jonathan Moyo continues to work with Chamisa, right? He works with Chamisa together with Edmund Kudzai and this and that. The elections come, they go. They help each other produce Excelgate. It's this big revelation about how the election was rigged. Everything was bad. And it continues for a bit. Then he falls out with Nelson Chamisa. Badly. All of a sudden, Chamisa is very bad. Chamisa first falls out with Edmund Kudzai and then later Jonathan Moyo. And Moyo just loses his mind. Chamisa is this and that. Mukoma Noema all night. Chamisa is logical. Chamisa is that. He just goes and he just becomes anti-Chamisa through and through, but he's still anti-ED and still imaginably pro-Chiwenga until now, when Jonathan Moyo is now fully back to ED. So the thing with me is, you don't need me to tell you the kind of character that Professor Jonathan Moyo has. You just need to go back and read what Mugabe has said about him before, from calling him duplicious, calling him a weevil, almost calling him a snake per se. You speak to Nelson Chamisa or the people around CCC, they have no kind words for the time they worked with him, and they couldn't wait to see the back of him. You speak to people around Maynard the time they're working together, they've got issues with him. And they specifically keep bringing up that there was an issue of lack of transparency and accountability when it came to money. So Jonathan Moyo supposedly has a money issue, and that issue of Marima t-shirts that is stolen really becomes a serious problem. So what's going on in Jonathan Moyo? I don't have evidence to say Jonathan Moyo is doing anything, but I've watched him turn one more time, and this isn't surprising, right? He has been turning since the 90s. Jonathan Moyo is in the Jonathan Moyo business. And anything that will put food on his table, that put money in his pocket, he will follow it. The challenge is we have a significant amount of people that will follow Jonathan Moyo because he has big words, great English, sounds sophisticated, is a professor, says these things in colorful and fancy ways. I just think we just need to get to a point whereby we just blank him and just look. If I feed you dog shit in a fancy plate, it's no different from me feeding you pig shit in a Congo plate. And Jonathan Moyo is in the business of really feeding you dross in a very nice plate. He'll add a bit of lettuce and cucumber and spices, and he will convince you that he's talking sense even when he isn't. So I think if you want to understand the amendment bills, I think right best off listen to constitutional lawyers. Listen to Jackie Sande, listen to Rex Midzi, listen to Tino Chinyoka. Those are lawyers that don't even see things the same way, but listen to them. I don't even know if Jonathan Moyo eventually finished his law degree, but I do know that the people that taught him say he was a pretty lousy law student. So I was even shocked that he was allowed to be in a space where he was pretending to be a constitutional law expert. But I understand there are some journalists that believe everybody has a right to be heard, right? And I believe people do need to be heard. But I also think we have a responsibility not to openly platform propaganda. We wouldn't invite a war criminal on a podcast just because we want to hear what the war criminal wants to say. We don't invite rapists on podcasts for that reason, because we don't want to hear what they want to say. But that's just my opinion. It shouldn't color how you see him. The next comment. Chiwenga high key isn't made for the Game of Thrones. How didn't he anticipate this? You can't trust a liar's word. What this shows is that he has no plans. He has been outsmarted, e.g., why not back Geza then? Yeah, so the thing with Constantino Chiwenga that baffles me is that it baffles me a lot. ED has been working him corner after corner, limiting his power, limiting his influence, eroding his base to a point where, we got to a point whereby, I've now said it 4 days in a row, that nothing short of a coup would stop those amendment bills, right? But again, that's been taken away from him. So I don't know. Maybe there's some grand strategy that he has. Maybe there's some that he's going to do later that I just don't know about. Please, can you do a program on our person, Frank Buyanga? Yeah. So I did get the memo about Frank Buyanga. And like I said, I do know what's happening with Frank Buyanga. And I do also know the backstory with South Africans playing fast and loose with his money, with his wealth, with wealthy South Africans basically keeping him in jail, not sending him to trial, but plummeting his resources. I know all of that, and I'm working towards that episode. It's just that one needs me to sit down and record it. But I've already sent out emails, by the way, right? So I've already sent out emails and questions, asking, okay, trying to get comment from different people. So that one's coming. Just the Buyanga one is coming. I promise you, it is coming. Let me just check on, because I've been away from TikTok for a while here. So I'm going to go back. All right. Sorry, guys, if I've missed some of your comments. I'm juggling the comments between. So see, I got the TikTok comments here. Can't quite see them, can you? Yeah. So I got the TikTok comments here. I also have them there. Then I've also got the YouTube comments. The YouTube comments are better because I can see them in the stream software, but I can't see the TikTok ones. And I've even forgotten that we are on Facebook, but I think the Facebook ones, if I'm not mistaken, we should have been able to see them here as well. But I'm just gonna check. Just give me a second here. Yeah, well, we don't have comments on Facebook, so that's great. We don't have comments as yet, but it is working there, so that's perfect. So we'll keep to the TikTok ones and the YouTube ones. Let me go back. I've missed. So the last one was about being clumsy. I answer that. Do you think the constitutional amendments bill number 3 will be a success? I think the bill itself can never be a success because it's going to take Zimbabwe backwards. But I think will they be able to get it to sail through in the absence of something monumental? They'll be able to. But like I said, you can never say. I know right now it looks like ED's in total control and nobody can stop him. But we've been there with Mugabe, like I said, where I'd have believed Mugabe was going to rule from the grave. I'd have bought that, but that's not the case. So it didn't happen. So yeah, let me just, to prevent me from continuously, let me just do that. Because I kept on flipping to look at myself in the mirror, so this is better. Quality prayers, but where is the proof? Quality prayers, you might want to ask the question again. Where's the proof of what? Couple of Kappas, is it true that Hubert Angel has fled Zimbabwe? Nope. Hubert Angel was at Munumtapa Buildings, the presidential headquarters, up until between 4 and 5 when the president left. So he was in Zimbabwe. I mean, he was in Zimbabwe till a bit late today. So I don't know if he's going to leave tonight or come back. I know he was in Malawi. He came back from Malawi on Monday, but he was in Zimbabwe today. Machinery Connect asks, is Chitunga still in police cells or they're now remanded in prison waiting for their bail? So I think, I haven't confirmed this because one of my contacts was unhappy with the TikTok live I did yesterday. He said I let out more than I should have. So he didn't answer my questions today. But my understanding was after they were remanded in custody, they'd have been sent to prison because they can only keep you so long at police cells. Police cells are not meant for like long stay. You're only meant to stay there for like just a little bit. So I don't think Chitunga is still, I think at this point they would have been in prison. They're probably at Sun City or that holding facility, the one that is between Midrand and Sandton. I've forgotten the name of the area, but there's a holding facility there. But he definitely should be in prison by now. According to you, SA detectives or Zim homicide or SA has resources, but they can't utilize them. My experiences, and I'll be, direct, these are my experiences. My experiences are that South African police are, one, they're a lot more than Zimbabwean ones by number and by ratio and by proportion. They have better resources. They have access to like a lot more things that Zimbabwean police don't have. But they don't tend to get the kind of results that CID homicide in Zimbabwe do. If CID homicide don't solve a case, like what's happening with Watson Mnyaka, for instance, it's because they don't want to. Most of the time, they do catch killers pretty rapidly, unless something stands in their way. But then at the same time, CID homicide do get away with a lot of tactics that South African detectives can't. CID homicide, they will just take you, they will pummel the under part of your foot, like the tender part of your foot, and they'll beat you with a hosepipe until you tell them the truth. South African police can't just do that, right? There'll be consequences if they did that. CID homicide in Zim can waterboard you. Like they use torture techniques to get confessions from suspects. South African detectives can't really do that. They can play with the boundary. They can dance on it, but they can't cross it. Zimbabwean detectives don't even play. They bolt past that boundary. They will torture you until you tell them what they want to know. So that sometimes means they can have a slightly easier job. The quietness of Chiwenga, I personally don't buy it. That guy is a soldier. Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't go around disrespecting soldiers or the army. One, because like I've always said, my father was a military man. My father was in the military, so I've got massive respect for that establishment. Um, but I also feel away from soldiers being, like being like very, very. Hold on a sec, guys. This video, when I said we don't have thingy comments on Facebook is because that video is private. That is incredible. And I have no way of changing it. Wow. Okay, we'll keep it to this. Doesn't matter. So what I was saying was he's a soldier, yeah, I get it. But the army when Chiwenga was there is very different from the army now. They were a lot more professional, a lot more hard hitting soldiers, people like Nkayaramba, SB Moyo, Pedence Shiri. Now the army's got quite a lot of softies. So it's very different. Plus, back then the army almost had like a form of a common purpose where you could almost argue that the soldiers were almost seeing things the same way or they're almost on the same side kind of thing. Now that's not the case. Sanyatwe wants to take over as president. Valerius Banda wants to take over as president. Valerio especially feels like Chiwenga had time. The agreement was ED would do one term. Chiwenga said, no, he's my brother. He let him have another term, and now he's threatening to take the whole arm. And they'll probably say, hey, dude, that's on you. You could have been finishing your term now, but you gave it to somebody else. So whether or not Chiwenga can still unite those people is difficult. He already has some trouble with people like Sanyatwe and Sbanda, where he technically was their senior at some point, but they always felt like they had either better military strips or they had had a better career than him. And there were certainly a lot of soldiers that felt that when he was promoted to become commander National Army and then commander Defense Forces, there were other people who were better placed than him to take that role. So that on its own means it's not a given that Chiwenga can unite the army to say, let's redo 2017. Miss Francis, do you think VP's wife is running a PR campaign in preparation when VP takes over? I know she's running his political strategy and branding. So I think by inference, you can say she's running his PR campaign. It's not being run in the way that, I saw she was the recipient of scathing attacks saying that she is trying to organize a coup or something. That's not the case. She is a serving, decorated, and highly respected, member of Zimbabwe's National Army. She is respected a lot, especially when it comes to strategy. She's seen as one of the best army strategists that we have. So I'm not surprised that she's doing the strategy for Chiwenga's branding. Just not in the malicious and naughty way that it was portrayed, where she is secretly organizing an uprising and so forth. She's not doing that. But she will look after the interests of her husband. The thing is, she's also a very likable character, right? And this is something that angers a lot of people, especially Auxilia Mnangagwa. It angers her and her team because she is a very likable person. Grace is an awful person. It's very dislikable. Auxilia Mnangagwa isn't really liked by a lot of people, largely because every once in a while she loses her temper and things go wrong and go pear-shaped. So people don't really like her. She struggles to communicate. She tries to go out there, but she's a lot more introverted. And that just means people don't connect with Auxilia Mnangagwa. People connect with Ken Obaloye. They like her. She knows how to connect with the youth. She knows how to crack a joke. She knows how to break the ice. She knows how to do the little things that endear her with the public. I have got no evidence that she is doing this because she wants Chiwenga to take over. I've got no evidence that she's a bad person who's just pretending to be a nice person. I think she's a very good person. In fact, all the evidence I've ever seen from people that know and work with her say Ken Obaloye is an amazing person. So she's an amazing woman, which naturally means she's treated with a lot of suspicion because people say, well, she's too nice. She is definitely doing this to help her husband. And, that's fair and that's normal. And if Ken Obaloyi wants her husband to take over, what's wrong with that? Zimbabwe isn't built to have one set of power, one president who is president until he dies. It's okay to have ambition. I don't know why ZANU-PF criminalizes his ambition, but it's okay to want to take over from Nangagwa. I mean, the law as it stands says he can't serve another term. So it's okay if she's running strategy. I definitely don't have a problem with it. I don't see if it's bad. I actually think it's pretty cool. I don't know what TD Power is saying. I'm just going to ignore him. Is it not a good thing that the amendments, if passed, could ensure no coups in the future? I hear you, Brighton Kunaka, but I don't think amendments themselves can stop coups in the future. And the reason I say this is because we have a constitution now that makes it impossible for Emerson Mnangagwa to remain in power or serve another term or extend his term in office. And that constitution as it is not stopping him from doing it. So I don't think Zimbabwe has a crisis of an inadequate constitution. Zimbabwe has a crisis of an appetite to adhere to the constitution and the law as it is. Those new amendments, when Emerson Mnangagwa inadvertently and eventually passes away, another person can change them, or the army can still do another coup and still find a way to hide behind it. There is that thing where people have always said that Zimbabwe has a problem with constitutionality versus constitutionalism, where we don't want to exist in the spirit of constitutionalism. We want to think of something and then find ways of bending the constitution to make it legal. So we're ever looking for loopholes and ways where we can catch the constitution on something and then get our way with what we want to do. Whereas in other places where there's a spirit of constitutionalism, people actually want to adhere to the constitution as it is. And there's that spirit of wanting to protect the sacred law of the land. And Zimbabwe always want to find ways of doing something and then find ways of justifying it. Tell us more about your CIO friend who helped you during the coup period. I didn't have a CIO friend, but you might want to remind me his name. During the coup, I had lots of contacts, but the majority of my contacts were military contacts. So I don't shy away from that. I think you guys know the Pulitzer. The Pulitzer is like one of the most prestigious journalism platforms. In fact, journalists that do well get rewarded with the Pulitzer Prize, right? Josh Hammer wrote a story on the Pulitzer, right, talking about the coup. I think it's called Enter the Crocodile. You can still find it online. And then he speaks about, I spoke to Maynard, a journalist with high-ranking military contacts, right? I don't hide or shy away from that. Every journalist has got something they're good at. And every journalist has got one area where they're really strong. So Andy Mitten has got some of the best sources at Manchester United. You can't compete with Andy Mitten. He's the best when it comes to that. David Ornstein has some of the best sources when it comes to London clubs, Chelsea, Arsenal, right? Blessed Daramhlanga is your go-to guy if you want exclusives in and around the opposition, CCC, Chamisa, etc. It's where his network is. And my contacts in my network is really, really, really good in the military. And I don't shy away from that. It's normal. Every journalist has got something that they're good at. If you have a problem with that, I'm sorry. There are other journalists that you can follow who have sources elsewhere. There is nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make us different, doesn't make one better than the other. Mdudu Matutu, for instance, he's got very, very good sources when it comes to the system itself, the administration, right? Matutu will tell you what happened in a cabinet meeting. He will know what happened in a Politburo meeting. It's what he's good at. So, yeah, you might want to jog my memory about the name of that friend. Maybe I could have an idea of who you mean, but I've got contacts across the divide and there's nothing wrong with that. Isn't it one of their strategies to think that they are fighting, of which it's their plan? I don't know if you could rephrase that question because I didn't quite understand it. Which streaming site are you using? On TikTok, I'm streaming from the TikTok studio. On YouTube and Facebook, I am streaming with Riverside FM. That's what I use. And I've got OBS open to monitor my sound. Prince Bookin says Jose Mampuru. I don't know yet which prison he is in. I'll have to find out for you. I don't know if he's at Jose Mampuru. Let's go back to YouTube for a bit because we've been gone for a while there. So my question was, what's okay? The next question is Real Kith. Real Kith asks, "What's your opinion on Chamisa?" I got that question yesterday. It's a difficult question to answer because I think I said yesterday, what's my opinion on him as a person? I think he's a great guy. I think he's a polite guy. You speak to him, he answers you. If you have a query as a journalist, you're likely to get a response from Chamisa than from his press team, right? His press team, most of them, have an enlarged sense of self-importance. They don't answer questions. They don't answer queries. They like to play hide and seek with journalists. Nelson doesn't. You ask a question, he'll answer you. And he'll answer you in what he thinks is an earnest and sincere way. And you have to give that to him. I have my own reservations about other aspects of his character, specifically him being a religious fundamentalist. I've said that before. I said it yesterday. I won't dwell on it too long, but I've said before that Nelson Chamisa thinks that he speaks to God and God talks back. He thinks he can have a conversation. Hey, God, how's been your day? Hey, Nelson, I'm okay. How are you? I don't trust anybody who thinks they can speak to God and God actually answers back physically and you can hear God's voice. That may be rooted in the fact that I don't have religious beliefs, but I struggle with that. I also struggle with the fact that religious fundamentalists are incredibly illogical people and difficult to deal with because they can attribute simple things to some godly force. They can leave things to God that men should address. And above all, they can choose illogical answers because God told them so. That is a challenge. And you've seen some of those decisions in how he makes political decisions where at times he makes what looks like the wrong choice, but he is convinced because God told him to do so. That's, for me, that's difficult. I think he is Zimbabwe's most popular politician by a mile. It's not even a competition. Nelson Chamisa has hit more than 2.1 million votes twice, in spite of everything that ZANU-PF does to fight him. That is not easy. That is absolutely not easy. That is difficult, what he's done there. He's also operating in an environment where if he starts a party, it gets stolen. He starts a party, it gets stolen. I mean, I was laughing that they took the MDCT away. He started CCC. They took CCC away. Now he's saying he's going to come back. CCC, people are saying there's a rumor that they're going to sue him to stop him starting another political party because he is still their president at CCC and they still have his face on the logo. This is follow him around and stop him from starting a party. So he's operating in very difficult conditions. Look, Zimbabwe's conditions are not optimal for any kind of opposition. Opposition supporters get beaten. I mean, where's Zimbabwe Shanduko today? That's a straight up question. Somebody who's dared to stand up. Look where he is today. I personally know what happened to Obey, who's then fled and is now in Norway. I know what he went through. I know what happened to Marco. Those are difficult places to operate in. So to win 2.1 million votes twice, it takes a lot. Like it really, really takes a lot to do that. So you have to give him credit for that. I also know that he's got certain faults, how he's handled. Chamisa has a problem that I saw with Bushiri, where they are not capable of entering into a relationship and then leaving that relationship without falling out spectacularly. So acquaintances or former colleagues always become enemies with them. That's a problem when you're a leader. You need to be able to find ways of managing divorce, managing separation in ways where your former colleagues do not become your adversaries. And Chamisa can't do that. I promise you today, if Makombore Aruzwishe and Obey started talking about what they went through, you get the shock of your life. And they're not the only ones. So many things that happened around him that you look at him and think, this is bad leadership. So, but outside of that, what's my opinion of him? Oh, I like him. I think he's a good guy. Completely good guy. Let me go back. I've missed a couple of questions here. Now on Man United, we all know Carrick will likely get the job because it's cheap and this board loves cheap. This is just Ole 2.0. Who would be your ideal manager for United? Funny enough, I think, and I know that people are not Man United fans here, but it's a Q&A, so I have to answer it. I would have loved for United to get a really good manager like Enrique, but I think Carrick just makes too much sense for them that there's no way they're not gonna get Carrick there. One, because like you said, it's cheap. Two, also because continuity. And three, right? I met with a couple of journalists. I think if you look up, I met Carl Anka when I went to United versus West Ham. I worked that game. And I also spoke to other different journalists. And those that know that are football sources feel that United hopefully want to get to where Barcelona was at some point, where, Guardiola came from the academy. They want to bring in coaches within the culture. Because I think it's clear that one of the biggest mistakes that happened with Ruben Amorim is he didn't understand Man United. He didn't understand the team. He didn't understand the fans. He didn't understand the culture. He was a misfit. And it just didn't work. And that has now happened twice. It was the same with Eric Ten Hag, where he did win, but there were persistent clashes with Eric Ten Hag, either not understanding the size of the club, the expectations of the club, or the culture at the club. Carrick does. In fact, except for Jose Mourinho, our most amazing periods since Ferguson left have been with Carrick and Solskjaer. So then you asked about corruption. On corruption, yes, even in Gabe's times it has been there in Marana, etc. But Chivai and Tungwara taking it to the next level and even incorporating kids into the game. Yeah, and you know what the thing is? And I said yesterday that in Shonam Gabangas Nachiramu, right? Like the office of the president had a lot of dignity. Under ED, thieves can take selfies with the president. That is wild, right? And not particularly pointing at any particular person, but I'm talking about ED hangs around with dodgy characters. You know, the dodgiest that I got to see Mugabe was when he did that song. It started with him saying, picking up a phone saying, "Hello, Aziz, did he say, And I remember when that song came out, I was like, wow. Because Mugabe had built up this aura around him that the office of the president was serious. The office of the president under ED is not serious. It's a jokers club. It's anybody can go there. And criminals love being around him. And he loves being around them. Before when ED was vice president, I think maybe that's where it comes from. People used to give him kudos in that he was approachable. Anyone could go to the farm, right? I've been to the farm many times in my life, right? More than 100, maybe. And anyone could come to the farm. Makorokoza would come to the farm. Vendors would come to the farm. And I think ED never graduated from ED, I put Mbanje in Makorokoza farm on a weekend to, dude, you're the president. The office you occupy needs a certain level of etiquette and decorum. He's never graduated to that. And that's why we see what we see. Is it true that Mike Chimwembe was caught with the phone? I've seen the story on Neander. And look, Lance Guma is a very good journalist, one of the best journalists. In fact, I remember when Walter Magaya first got in trouble with forcing himself onto girls. Nobody reported about it in Zimbabwe. I think it was like 2016 or 2017. Lance Guma was the first person to report on it from the UK. Lance Guma and the South African paper. So I've got nothing but respect for Lance. And I worked for him initially in my early days as a journalist. So I've got no reason to believe Lance would write a hit piece or a story that's not false, because he's a great journalist. But I personally haven't seen any evidence or seen the story. But going on that Lance is a good journalist, I'd say, yeah, it's true. So these folks want to be president just for the sake of being president, not even one of these people who were below Mugabe's dynasty are qualified to bring change to Zimbabwe. Yeah. So that was not really a question. It's a comment, I suppose. These guys want to be, yeah, it's power for the sake, for power for the sake of power's sake. Do you believe Chamisa isn't affiliated with ZANU PF, and do you have any insights on his new alleged plan, or he's just a wannabe pastor with no real plans? Because why would you disappear? Yeah, Chamisa is complex, like I said, because I understand the gravity of what he's facing. It's tough, but I also don't understand some of his questions. But like I said, the problem with Chamisa is he takes instructions from God. I am not kidding you. Nelson Chamisa believes he talks to God and God talks back. I I don't know what to say to anybody who believes that. I just don't know. Because they could make the most illogical choice and they will tell you God told me. And you can't hear the voice of God. It's your fault. You do not have the discernment. You cannot hear the voice of God. I I don't know how you can then counter him on that. But do I think he's affiliated with ZANU? No, Chamisa has fought ZANU PF all his life. And unlike Jonathan Moyo, Chamisa doesn't have a history of flipping, doesn't have a history of going where the money is. But there's been a lot of suspicious questions, you know. He could have called for a demo at any time if he wanted to bring Zimbabwe to a halt. He's never done so. He doesn't really get arrested. He's the only opposition leader that doesn't get arrested. You know, they arrest BT, they arrest people around him, but they never touch Nelson. So it's that you're too comfortable to be a leader. But again, you know, it's like taking 1 and 2 and making 59. So it's not evidence. I've not seen any evidence. And obviously I have to be careful in terms of looking at what I think are questionable events, but still being able to say, I have evidence of this, I don't have evidence of that. Do you think Shom Nangagwa has been positioned into leadership? Is General Chiwenga's silence or non-response when attacked very concerning? Shom Nangagwa is being positioned generally to eventually rise up and lead the army in one way or the other. But there's a problem there, right? Shom Nangagwa is an alcoholic. He's a dangerous alcoholic. Yeah. To the level that he starts drinking from the time he wakes up. So if Shom Nangagwa doesn't drink, his hands start to shake. That is how bad he has dependency syndrome. On more than 4 occasions in the last 6 months, he has collapsed at work when he's meant to be protecting the president. He's only bodyguard because it's his dad, but he is 1, not good at the job, and 2, not fit. He's hungover every day in the morning. There are people who work in the presidential guard who complain that he shows up reeking of alcohol. He moves around with a whiskey bottle inside his jacket. So whether or not he will still be a viable candidate is another story. But then remember this. Emerson Mnangagwa has enough kids to replace Sean Mnangagwa, even if Sean Mnangagwa persisted with being an alcoholic. If a soft quiz to ever happen, who do you think is capable of leading or has the balls to lead it, considering a coup requires strategic planning and lots of cash? That one's difficult because if I answer it, I could directly put the military officers that I think could do it in direct harm. But there are a lot of young colonels and brig generals who have sense and who should be able and who can lead in their 40s, 41, 42, 43. So, Mr. DJ, you can't use religion when dealing with thugs. The number one problem with Africans is too many reliance on so-called beliefs. The world doesn't work that way, but apparently ED uses witchcraft. Yes or no? I know that ED loves Konomapo story. I don't know about the witchcraft part, but he's a big muscle guy. But then so is Chiwenga anyway. So, Dudu Dube, they say Zim turned down a 360 million health funding by the USA. That is true. And I know they've brought up sovereignty, but my understanding is that they are looking at an alternative. One of Mnangagwa's sons has spent a significant time in India, probably the bulk of the last 2 years in India, trying to come up with a health pharmaceutical deal that obviously he will run. So I think they're going to go the India way. But yeah, they did turn it down. I read the memo. They mentioned it's against sovereignty and this and that. But yeah. Me says, tell us Mukandi, the Boquest owner. I don't know who that is. I think I missed that. I don't know what that is. Let me just go back to TikTok. I've been away for a long time. Sorry, TikTok guys. Let me come back to your comments. I've exhausted the ones on on YouTube for now. What's your take on Sean? Is he influential in the military? Sean's not influential in the military now. Sean is influential as his dad's bodyguard. And to be fair, so before when you went to see the president, right, you would need to see a guy called Gwatiringa. He was like the secretary. He was like before you get into CED, the last person you'd see was Gwatiringa. In fact, when you arrive at State House, Gwatiringa has to confirm your appointment. You go for the health checkup. You go for screening, you sit in the waiting room where there's no cell phone network. Then Gwatiringa comes to get you and puts you in the second waiting room, which is before you get in to see the president. And before you then see the president, you used to be able to see Gwatiringa. Now you see Sean. So Sean now makes the final decision on whether you get to see the president or not. When he came in, that is that time when there were reports that Edie was having dementia. He had fallen a couple of times. He wasn't necessarily in charge of his faculties. Things were kind of like all over the place. So that is when he came in. And he stayed since. So he's got influence with regards to the presidential guard itself and being around the president. But he's got nowhere near the level of influence. He's a junior military officer. There's no indication that he's got any kind. There are so many senior people above him. I would say General Monda has got more influence in the presidential guard than Sean. Sean doesn't even have presidential. He doesn't even have influence in the barracks themselves. There are soldiers in the press guard that live in the barracks. So yeah, Sean doesn't really have that influence. No. Avenger, while on religion, what's your take on prophets in line with politics? I answered that one yesterday. I see religious figures around the president as being people in the business of themselves. That's it, really. Nyandile said, "Are you sold out yourself? People say that you are sold out." The curious thing about this, Nyandile, is for anyone to sell out on anything, right? You need to have been sold in on it. So if you and I have never sat down and entered any kind of social contract that Maynard, I shall do this for you and you shall do this for me, it is impossible for me to sell out because you and I have got no agreement on anything. We are not in a homogeneous spot where we are fighting for the same aspirations, the same goals, and it's not only illogical but a bit unfair to exist in a space where other people can outsource their own aspirations to other people. So, therefore, if you listen, I'm talking about Chamisa, for instance, I was very clear about what I agree with on him and what I don't agree with him. But I did not go as far as even entertaining selling out or anything because Nelson Chamisa and I have never had any kind of agreement about anything. So Nelson Chamisa cannot betray me. He can make decisions I don't agree with. He can make decisions that I might question, but he's not sold out on anything. And in fact, the entire concept of selling out comes down to this. You need to entrust me with something. And having entrusted me with something, I need to go out and exchange that thing with your adversary and therefore benefit from what you entrusted me with. You and I have never met. You and I have never exchanged anything. You have never entrusted me with anything. And I'm certain the people they say you sold out have never entrusted me with anything either. So there is nothing of theirs that I have exchanged and given to someone else. If I had existed in a space where I was operating on their resources, on their investment, on trade secrets, money secrets, on a movement, then yeah, they could say that. But that's not the case. So if people do say I sold out or I'm selling out, that's okay with me. I get the same messages from people within ZANU-PF who think I abuse my access, especially to the president, and my access to military sources and I abuse that to report on things they don't want to be reported on. I get it from people here. I get it from everywhere. It would help you and those that speak about selling out a lot if they reflected and remembered that for me to sell out, you need to have given me something that I exchange with your adversaries. I don't speak in glowing terms about ZANU-PF at the moment, about Emerson Mnangagwa, but I don't view them as my adversaries. I will report corruption by ZANU-PF. I will report on opposition figures. I am a journalist. I'll touch left, I'll touch right. I tend to focus a lot on ZANU-PF and government and those kind of things because that is where my sources are. If I woke up tomorrow and I all of a sudden had incredible sources in the opposition, I would report on the left, right, and center. Sometimes I do get stories on the opposition. Sometimes I overlook those stories because sometimes I have to gauge what makes sense and what doesn't. So, a private donation scam within the opposition is fascinating to me. But it is nowhere near the same as Delish Nguwaya getting a dodgy contract for $90,000 a day that he then splits down the middle, 45-45 with Shwan Mnangagwa. That for me makes a lot more sense because we all have to pay that bill. We're paying into city council, but the Marema Bini were paying rates and they're taking that money. That for me is a more valuable story, right? There are stories, for instance, that I wouldn't touch, right? You absolutely don't hear me going deep on stories about relations between people, like stories to do with sex. I just don't touch them. I doesn't interest me. It's not my kind of journalism. We have enough tabloid journalists that can cover those stories. I can casually mention, for instance, that the president has many kids or that Grace said this about the president. But I will not come and tell you that, by the way, I know this particular story of the president as a 17-year-old girlfriend that is pregnant. I wouldn't go down that route. Or I know that Justice Chigumba was sleeping with Minister Chitando or this and that. That's not my kind of journalism. Could I be selling out? Maybe. But different brushes for different folks. So it is what it is. Locke says Amorim changed United's culture. Carrick is actually a beneficiary of that culture. Amorim changed nothing about United's culture. He was winning a game a month. Do you think Zimbabwe will be free? Nyandile, I don't know. I wish journalists had a crystal ball, but we don't. I can't prophesy and I don't have a crystal ball. But I think Zimbabwe will be better when Zimbabweans want Zimbabwe to be better, and Zimbabweans who feel it's not better come together to make it better. Because the biggest tormentor of Zimbabweans is not Malawians or South Africans or Namibians. The biggest tormentors of Zimbabweans are Zimbabweans supported by other Zimbabweans. So Mnangagwa is a Zimbabwean, Auxilia is a Zimbabwean, but they don't even pick up weapons, right? The people that stand around them with weapons and stop you from doing anything to them, they're also Zimbabweans. And I'm Kungunugwa, the Twitter trolls, the guys, Midlands Information Desk, and I'm Minister Muda, they're also Zimbabweans. So Zimbabweans' biggest problems is other Zimbabweans that are willing to profit in the chaos, and only Zimbabweans can stop that. So it's hard to talk about Zimbabwe and freedom because Zimbabwe is under bondage from other Zimbabweans. So that freedom is Zimbabweans being freed from other Zimbabweans. So that's how I see it. Tindo, I'll give you a call after the live, Mkoma. Yeah, I'm around. It doesn't help that I'm doing a lot of work in the Premier League. So I'm never, like, one day I'm in Newcastle, next day I'm in Liverpool, then I'm in Everton, then you run down to Italy for the Champions League, then you come back. But I'll see you around. We can't be led by a pastor. Yeah, we just saw what pastors did in Malawi. You know, Chakwera spoke so well with that American accent of his. It was incredible. But when I was in Malawi and Chakwera was president, it was laughable. Like basic things didn't work. The current Malawian president, Peter Mutharika, when I interviewed him in 2021, he was in opposition at the time. He could barely stay awake. That's how old and weak he was. I don't even want to imagine how he is now because that is 5 years ago. But he's president and he's starting to make the state look like a state. It's starting to look all so different. And you look at that and you think, Mutharika is so bad and old and weak. but Chakwera took that to new levels. I say to people, Chakwera is life's lesson that things can always get worse. Oof, I lost a bit of questions here on the TikTok. So I'm checking. Why should one trust your word? On the other side, it's against your word. Who are you standing for? That's when somebody called Baba. I am not asking you to trust anything. You don't have to take anything that I say, which is why I didn't knock on your door and say to you, "Hi, you need to buy this." So I'm not selling it. You are free to do anything you like with the information that you read from me, or that you hear from me, or from any other journalist. That's the thing. The responsibility for what you believe in, and the responsibility for what you believe to be true or false, what you take, what you disregard, that responsibility is on you, not on me. And if you choose not to believe it, believe you me, I will not lose a moment's sleep. I will probably not even notice. If you disagree with it and come and say, "Oh, Maynard, I disagree with this," I will happily disagree with you. If you ask me, "Okay, Maynard, explain this," I will explain it for you. If you ask me, "Maynard, I heard this and this happened. Can you tell me what you think you've heard?" I will tell you what I've heard. So, for me, the thing is, right, because I'm a journalist, I talk about people and I write about people. I don't talk about vegetables and potatoes. I talk about people, right? I will tell you what I've heard. But for me, these are stories. This is not personal. I don't have a personal problem with Chamisa. I don't have a personal problem with Edie. I don't have a personal problem with anybody. I am just a journalist. For me, this is a story. And in a day, I can work on 9, 10, 11 different stories. From the moment I wake up and open my emails, if I don't have a shoot or a game on that day, I would have so many things to do in that day that I will wake up the next morning and need to go through my reminder tab to see the stories that I worked on and where I need to start over and where I need to follow up, who I need to email and etc. It's stories for me. I'm a journalist. Like I told you, I have an editor, right, who expects a certain throughput per day, at least marginal gains, who will ask me, "What's in your calendar in the morning?" And will ask me at the end of the day, what are you bringing home? Where are we with this particular story? It's your stories. I tell you those stories. I am not the stories I tell you. I do not have, unless I specifically say to you, I'm emotionally invested in this story. Best believe I'm not invested in that story. And if that story has got nothing to do with my immediate family, or me, or Man United, because I get touchy about them, I, for the most part, will absolutely not really be bothered, because it's just a story. Someone who works in a supermarket doesn't come home and get upset that you chose to take cool baked beans instead of Heinz, or that you chose Baker's in bread over Proton. That's basically what you're saying to me. I don't care the bread you eat. I don't care the beans you eat. That's your choice. So let me go back to YouTube for a little bit because I've missed those. Hypothetical. What do you think? Just give me a sec, Mr. DJ. Hypothetically, what do you think is a way for Zim to come back geopolitically? Don't hold back. What would you do as president? I think power and corruption are very layering, and once in power, Ngoma and Dio. Yeah, I spoke about Ragnar Lothbrok, right? He said power is a bad thing. It's attracts the worst, corrupts the best. So that's the thing with power. Daniel, how many children does Edie have? Several. It's going to a point where you have to Zanify in order to make it in Zim. Also, side note, what is with Chivaya loving Japraiser? I think Chivaya really likes Japraiser's music. Like, he really, really, really likes his music. But I think really only he knows how much he likes it. Yeah. What was the follow-up on Trevor Ncube's story? Did he comment on the situation? Oh, yeah. So the Trevor Ncube story where journalists hadn't been paid. No, Trevor did not comment on that story. And the situation hasn't really changed at AMH. it's, you could say it's almost persisting. So, and you know, the problem with what happened with Trevor Ngube and what's happening with the journalists on that side is that the journalists then go to work because the only thing they know how to do. But when they get a story, instead of taking that story to the editor, they now get varamromo. So essentially, we now have this economy of finding a story and closing it, and finding a story and closing it, and finding a story and closing it. That's how Zim works now, and that's the bad thing. How bad do things really have to get before Zimbabweans wake up? Really bad. Really bad. Yeah, Crod says Zimbabweans have ruined Zimbabwe. Yep, that's true. Sam Sterling says, Maynard, can you bear my children? Wow. No, I can't. I am married, unfortunately. Can I hear the story of your life, Maynard? It's on Google. If you Google it, you see a lot of different stories. About 50% is true, 50% is not. But you can make out what's not, what is true and what isn't true. Let's go back to TikTok. I am gonna wrapping up the live, guys, in like the next 10 minutes because it's like 10:30 this side. So, does VP Chiwenga still has influence on what happens in the military? Not as much. No, he's been severely weakened in the army. He's lost a lot of allies, and like I said, the army in Zimbabwe now has different aspirations. So a lot of figures have retired. Some have passed away. They share different visions. Some also aspire to take over, and then there's that tension where the civilian aspect of ZANU-PF feels military figures are being parachuted into positions, right? So no longer do you need to spend 5 years in the cells, work your way up, become a councillor or MP or join the central committee, then the Politburo later, and then become something and maybe become an MP or a minister. People serve in the military, and by all accounts, people in the military have got lots of money, especially the ones that once you enter the secretariat, right, which is major general upwards, those guys have a lot of money, right? They can tinker around with things at Zimbabwe Defense Industries and so forth. So they make a shitload of money. Then afterwards they leave and they become ministers. You know, Sanyatwe is leaving office, becoming a minister. Valerius Panda is going to get an appointment very soon. So it's creating a lot of tension there. So you've got people in ZANU-PF that want control of the party to return to civilian rule, and they want to rule the party. The military has people that want to take over. Valerio wants it. Sanyatwe wants it. You know, so it's complex. And you know, that guy was running FAS, who's now commander of the National Army. He's built pretty much a parallel structure that mirrors the CIO, and he feels that someday when he becomes vice president, he should be able, you know, to go up there and become president. There's a lot of people, you know, it's like Gachamas Tulela, he thinks he can be president as well. Emerson Jr. thinks he can be president. So Chiwenga doesn't have as much influence in the army anymore, and ED severely weakened him by retiring his allies or planting ideas in the heads of his allies that why wait for Chiwenga to be president? You can be president too. You know, that kind of thing, which is like what's happening now with Tungwarara, where Tungwarara believes he's going to be anointed to take over as president. But at the same time, Tagire has been told that he'll take over as president. So, and ED does that a lot. He sets up people to fight his rivals, and he sets up people with the same ambitions, and then they end up clashing, which is why I end up having the situation where everyone is saying, I'm a presidential appointee, you can't criticize me, I'm a presidential appointee, but the criticism is coming from another presidential appointee. So that's ED for you, and it's a bit of a tough one. Do you know Farai, the owner of multiple gas stations? Do you know his surname? The Farai that I know who has gas stations is in South Africa, though. So I don't know if that's the person that you mean, Baba, but I'll look for him. Nyandile says our agenda to bring down, and I don't really understand, Nyandile, what you mean. I think this might need you to like arrange like an interview where we like talk and you ask me these questions, because I'm trying to follow some of your questions and I can't quite get what you mean. Let's assume the constitution sells through. What's the outlook post 2030? I think post 2030, if ED is alive, he'll try and go further. He's not going to stop. So post 2030 will be some amendment for 2033. ED like Mugabe. You know, Mugabe was still president and was shitting his pants. And I think ED wants the same thing. Where are the Chiambakwe and Chikaosike? Oh, jeez, I've missed a lot of comments here. I'll look into those commission reports that you mean, Chatalile. I'll look into those for you. Do you think there's a possibility of a paramilitary group being able to stage a coup in Zimbabwe? No. No. The state would respond in a devastating way and absolutely crush it. So I don't think that's a possibility now. Ziambi said that we got a toxic elections, meaning even the president is toxic. Not only that, when Ziambi says we want to avoid the shootings of 2018 and the violence of 2008, our elections are toxic because of that. It's wild. Okay. We had post-election violence in 2008 and 2018. Who did the violence? It was you. Like, this is... Elections in Zimbabwe are not toxic. ZANU-PF is toxic during elections in Zimbabwe. So ZANU-PF is changing the constitution to stop themselves from being toxic. That is wild. So, I didn't agree with what Ziambi says. And I know the minister very well, Ziambi. I've got a personal relationship with him. We chat, but he was completely offside. Elections in Zimbabwe are not toxic. ZANU-PF is toxic. In both the incidences he mentioned, 2008 and 2018, who was beating people? It was ZANU-PF. There was no one in the opposition who was beating up anyone, except it was ZANU-PF beating people in the opposition. So if there's any toxicity and violence in the elections, it's coming from them. So, yeah. ET family, the beans we eat Haynes. Why do you not eat cool beans? Why do you eat Haynes beans? I'm a cool beans person. I like cool beans. I feel like they're softer. But you're probably right. Haynes beans is great. It's got that stingy taste that I really like. TK, please, bro, a small recap on the stories you spoke about too. So we're live on YouTube, TK, and that podcast, it's like 2 hours long. That podcast will still be there on YouTube, so you should be able to still see it. Are you gonna go into podcasting? It's the difficulty with me committing something like that is my day job. So I work in the Premier League now and in the EFL. As a professional sports photographer and a professional sports videographer. So I can't leave that job because that job allows me to pay the bills. So for instance, if you look at our first couple of lives, especially on YouTube, they were really bad, right? Because we just didn't have the stuff. We've bought this mic, the pop filter, the stand, what different things. Dug Up doesn't make money. So I have bought this with my own money, and I've bought this with money that I used when I went to shoot United versus West Ham versus Manchester United. So if I leave that job to fully focus on this, I will not be able to feed my children. So I have to continuously work. So I would want to go into podcasting, but I can't. I can't because this is expensive. I have to pay for the internet. I have to pay for bills. I've got things to do. So, we do this for fun. It's great that this week I'm not working until the weekend. But the following week after that, I will be working. And then when the Champions League comes back after that, I'll be working again. So, but why we've gone for lives, right, is it'll take me 2 or 3 days to produce a Dug Up video, right? From setting it up, editing, fixing the sound later, and this and that. That takes time. With this, when I have time like this, I can just plug in, come on live, and we can talk about it. It, however, means that the episodes cannot be as deep as the stuff we normally do on video. But then to be fair, the really deep investigations are the ones that we do on Substack, the long reads. Those are the ones with data, facts, pictures, evidence, V11s, right? And those make up 1/10 of our readership on Dug Up anyway. YouTube videos make up about 80% of that. So I feel that live streams, and it's a decision we discussed with some of the guys at Dug Up, that live streams allow me to get on quickly and give you guys live reaction, answer your questions, tell you about a story, and talk about it as fast as we can. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me see. Hey, what camera am I using? Right now, I'm using the Sony A9 III. I have an A7 IV, I have an A7R5, I have an A1 Mark II, and I have The A93, yeah. I have an A7C2 as well. Jesus. I know it's a lot of cameras, but they all perform different. But on here, I'm using the A93 because the A93 doesn't overheat. Incredibly, it's on right now. It's been on. We've been live for like maybe almost 2 hours. There's no fan on it, so that's why I use that. Does TikTok pay? No, we don't make anything from TikTok. We've had a couple people send gifts, but all of those gifts come up to a combined 6 cents. So yeah, doesn't pay. Doesn't pay anywhere near what would be enough to run a story. The reporters we have on the ground in SA and South Africa, I paid by joint contributions by myself, Prof. Changamire, and three of the other dug up guys who are not in Africa. So we ran it out of our pockets. No, TikTok doesn't pay in the UK, could I? It doesn't. There's 6 cents in our dashboard. So let me go back to YouTube before I wrap this up because where can you elaborate on the FAS and parallel CIO? I'm intrigued before you closed off. Oh, okay. So during the elections, what happened with FAS was in the run up to that election 2023. All right, FAS was created initially just as running associates and this and that. But FAS basically became what the CIO is. Now, if you remember, and that video is on YouTube, if you look for the truth about the CIO, I spoke at length about how, despite what's on paper, the mandate of any CIO officer, the first thing they're told when they join the CIO is that your job is to break the law for presidential interests. That is the mandate of any CIO officer. FAS's mandate was to make sure that they bend the rules and break the law and make sure ED wins that election. That on its own is the same mandate as the CIO. What then made it worse was the various things that the president's department does during elections: canvassing, polling, gauging local sentiment, engaging agents for the president. So by the way, when there's an election, the party's got election agents, right? So CCC's got agents, ZANU's got agents, the MP has got his own polling agents. The president has got polling agents that report to the command center of the CIO. These are his personal agents. So most of the time, in fact, the president has the presidential results before ZEC has even finished collecting, right? A lot of people like to talk about what happened in 2018 where I announced the results before ZEC, right? It was because there are networks of people, different agents that collect. Zesni does the same thing, and you're able to kind of tally and use that to get results. FAS had their own agents. So every single thing that the CIO was meant to do, FAS was doing it. They deployed as many officers as the CIO deployed in that election. Now, here's what will blow your mind. Not only did they do that, but the CIO's funding for that election was cut down from 256 million to just 40 million. The rest of that funding was given to FAS. Before FAS got an additional funding, right, of about 137 million, I believe. So FAS was way more resourced than CIO, doing the job that CIO should have been doing. Now, I understand that the challenge was in 2018, there was a Boram Sango where ED basically lost, right? He lost to ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF had more votes than ED. And FAS was essentially put in to avoid that. That's why FAS was put in. So that structure of FAS was eventually dismantled just after the election because it had become a big problem. So under normal circumstances, a deputy director reports to the director goes to see the president to give him reports. But because FAS was being run parallelly, the deputy director was then reporting direct to the president. So he had intelligence reports from FAS, intelligence reports from CIO. Now, Emerson Mnangagwa has never been able to fully recapture the CIO. The CIO is still a mirror image of Mugabe, and they're still, for the most part, really, really loyal to Mugabe. FAS was meant to counter that. The results obviously are dismal because Emerson Mnangagwa still scored less than ZANU-PF. Now, Where the former fast boss feels this works in his favor. Systems are perpetual. They made enough money for FAS agents to survive, and they continue to survive today based on that election funding on a normal salary of a CIO agent. And when he then wants to prop up his own candidates for presidency, he has a CIO mirrored in his own image that will be there to break the law for his interests, not for presidential interests. So, Mr. DJ, that was your answer to you asking, can you elaborate on the FAS and the Paro CIO? I'm intrigued. That was that. Joe Rogan, Stephen Bartlett, Cleo Abraham, Callum Johnson, Jay Shetty. Whose podcast would you binge on? I'd say all of them. Denzel says, Sam Sterling, Honey Trap vibes. Yeah, that one's, yeah. Me asking the important question, is Mzambi safe? Yeah, you know, the situation in Mzambi with Walter Mzambi is quite fascinating. Before Walter Mzambi went, right, and Walter Mzambi taught him his Shumba, right? So I call him Sekuru Sekuru. Although Walter Mzambi was staying with my nephew, Tino Mambeo, who is Mzukuru Kwandi, right? Tino Mambeo's mom is my father's biological sister. So there were discussions about Mzambi is going to go to Zim. Is it safe? Mzambi was there on the invitation of ED. Buried the hatchet, work together, right? Mzambi is a diplomatic guy. Forget what we wrote about the fake PhD, right? Away from that, Mzambi is a cool guy. Mzambi went. His impression was that he would meet Emerson Mnangagwa at the State House. He went. That process I explained to you about, you get there, you go to the waiting room, you see Gwatiringa or Sean, whatever. Mzambi went as far as the last door. Mzambi was blocked from seeing the president. So Mzambi never met ED in that visit. But he stuck around. Then Mzambi was told that, look, ED is going to Zambia. I think it's going to Zambia a day or two after or later. You can go and meet him in Zambia. Your meeting can now be held in Zambia. You can discuss what you wanted to discuss there. As Mzambi made his way to the airport, got his passport scanned, etc. Just before you get to the boarding, that final leg where there are three people at the airport, where one looks at your face, one looks at your passport, one looks at your ticket, and they both look at you, look at your documents. That's where Mzambi gets stopped. And he's told, you need to come to this room, we need to talk to you. And shortly afterwards, police arrive and they arrest Walter Mzambi. My understanding is that there was a fear that Walter Mzambi had come to spy. It's an illogical fear because Mzambi is struggling, right? He was holed up in Zambia. So he's struggling. Doesn't have any kind of money, isn't spying for anyone, but that was initially the fear. Then there were fears that maybe Mzambi is there to work for Chiwenga. These are all different reports that came via the CIO. But again, there's no connection because Chiwenga didn't invite Mzambi. And Mzambi was arrested and he's been in prison since. They've not released him. I think for the minute Mzambi is safe. Obviously, prison isn't a nice place. And remand prison is bad. And Mzambi's battled ill health while he's in there. And to be fair, if you're going to arrest Mzambi for stealing TVs, you probably need to arrest the people that got the TVs, i.e. the prophets and pastors that got those TVs. And they've not been arrested. The only thing I would worry with on Mzambi is if the military did decide to take over and they didn't want a military face as president and they wanted a civilian face, a puppet, like what was the case with that girl in, it's not Mongolia, man, is it Tibet? They could look at Mzambi because Mzambi appeals to almost everybody. He's largely seen as an okay guy, a good guy. So I hope that answers in terms of is Mzambi safe, right? There's an old quote about obtaining freedom from the barrel of the pew. Do you think it would get to that point? And do you think South Africa or SADC would stomach another disputed election? I think South Africa will always go with the flow and support ZANU-PF. But I don't think there is any prospect of an armed struggle in Zimbabwe. The state just has too much of a vice grip on power. And they are not scared to deploy. So, yeah. I can't find the video on CIO. So if you look on Dug Up, if you just say the truth about this, okay, if you just go on Dug Up and go on the videos, it's one of our very first videos. So you should be able to see it. So I'm gonna wrap up on the YouTube chat. I'm just gonna go through the last comments here on TikTok. You guys have been amazing. But I'm also mindful that we've now been streaming for 1 hour 50 minutes, so it's quite long. I'm also getting fatigue in my voice. So let me just go through what I've missed. Please look into Obram Trust and how they're stealing people's inheritance through judges. All right, thanks, Tim. Consider dropping me a line, Tim, as well. I've taken a screenshot of your comment, but just drop me a line in the DM. And if you want to give me any kind of tips, guys, my email is maynard.manyoa@dagup.uk. So you see my name is on the screen there. That's how you spell it. I've seen a couple of people spelling it incorrectly. Just so you know, it's Maynard, like the sweets. So maynard.manyoa@dagup.uk. Send me any tips and I'll work on them. But I've taken a screenshot. How can one land a job in sports photography and video? I addressed this yesterday, but just very briefly, you need lots of gear, like lots of gear. It's expensive. You're gonna need maybe 35, 40 grand of lenses, cameras, etc. And then you are going to need a portfolio. And then you're going to need to shoot for years. You are going to shoot for free in amateur leagues until you have a portfolio. Then you need to shoot national league and sell those images. So it's taken me since 2019 to get here. So it's gonna take you about 6 years to get there. So, but I have a video. If you look for Camera Maynard on YouTube, right? I've got another channel just called Camera Maynard. I've got a video there about how to become a sports photographer. That could help you. Do you think Chamisa has a chance? Yeah, he does. If he is a little more organized, because Chamisa is extremely disorganized, and so is the CCC. They are monumentally awful at being organized. If they're organized, yeah, they would win it. Let's see. Any thoughts on Econet after Matigari's post? Yeah, that story on Econet, I need to beg Matigari to speak to me about it. I happen to know him, so I hope I can, get him to open up about Econet and Strive Masiwa. It's something that I really want to get into about those share schemes. It's just unfortunate that I should have wrapped up 5 minutes ago, but even if I'm to push it till 11, with 9 minutes to go, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. Is the bureaucracy as influential in Zimbabwe? Martin Rushaya, Vincent Wungwa, George Charamba. Yes, it is. Those guys are the cogs of government, right? Your PEMSECs, they run that. They're the cogs of government. And to be fair, you are best off being on the good side of some of those guys. And to be fair, though, a lot of those guys are not monumental thieves. I was Gananda, so they make sense, or they'll make sense of a bad situation, but they are influential, definitely. Rushwa is definitely influential. Charamba is godly influential because he is one of the people who is in good books with everybody. So George Charamba is very good books with Chwenga, good books with Edie. He was in good books with Mugabe, so he's very important. Ben, what do you think about Robert Jr.'s story? About Robert Jr. is in rehab, so I wish him well. I hope he'll be fine. Notwithstanding the insults he threw at me when I interviewed him, but I'll be fine. He's done a good thing. Rehab inadvertently is a good thing. Addiction is a disease, right? Like I openly talk to people about my own struggles with alcohol, and how I eventually went clean. So addiction is a disease, and I'm happy for Robert Jr. that is in rehab, and I hope he comes out better and can be on the other side, on the better side of the law. Because the things he's getting arrested for, that was terrible. That lifestyle they were leading only ends one way. So, yeah. Leila Angel, George Charamba is my dad's friend. He's extremely professional. Yeah, George Charamba is a great guy. I've got nothing bad to say about him. I've never had any kind of bad run-in with him. He's a good guy. D, what camera are you using? It was asked before. I'm using a Sony A9 III. Using a Sony A9 III. I know it's not a video camera per se, but it doesn't overheat when I stream for a long time like this. That's why I picked it. The A7R5 overheats after a while. The A1 Mark II is okay, but it's a pain sometimes. Your thoughts on Bellarmine Mugabe across the border? Oh, I think you arrived just after I'd given them, including Bonnie the creative and Apple user. I just answered that about Bellarmine. I did. If you check on YouTube, the right at the start of the stream, I did answer it, but we'll see on March the 3rd when he appears. I've got one more question from Mr. DJ. I mean, I owe him. He's been here from the start of the stream on CIO being loyal to Mugabe and how that affects ED. So the CIO was built on a system of tribe and also of loyalty to Mugabe. So really, CIO was, for the most part, an organization staffed with Zezuru people, right? So it has never been able to really unscrew that. And ED directly blames the CIO for getting 50.3% or 50.2% of the vote, while ZANU-PF at almost 70%. He blames them for that. So he's never been able to unshackle that. Isaac Moy was brought in to bring sweeping changes to the CIO. He wasn't able to. Fulton Mangwai is in now. He was very good at national parks. I had high hopes for him. He's tried to carry on what Isaac had done to keep the CIO as a professional force, to not have them go around beating people and stuff, to actually have them bring up intelligence reports, not silly stuff about, Chamisa trying to upstage the government or about activists meeting, going for military training in Cape Town, all that kind of hogwash that the CIO used to do. So, but I think maybe Mangwanya needs another year before we can really call on whether he is doing well at his job. But it's one of those where I think it is resigned to the fact that the CIO can never be entirely loyal to him. The CIO was built by Mjure and Mugabe, so they really, really did feel undone. And remember, when the coup happened, those guys were held. CIOs dumped their cars in town because soldiers knew which cars the CIOs would drive, like those Datsuns and this and that, right? And then some of them dumped their guns, hid their weapons, including those who were loyal to ED. They had to hide from the army, They were held hostage for weeks. They literally had their pants down, like their pants pulled down. And that kind of embarrassment is difficult to stomach, Then you imagine that under Mugabe, CIOs had a take home of 1.8, some of them 2,000, 2.2, right? Things were starting to get bad then with the bond and stuff, but it was close to 1:1, For the most part, on Mugabe, they'd been paid in US dollars. They were getting these vehicles. So CIOs were living quite the life. Under Mnangagwa, the CIOs got to a point of earning $500. That, for them, killed morale. And then you had those issues, like I'm saying, during elections where a private and parallel thing with FAS is receiving almost 500 million in funding. That's $500 million. And CIO staffers don't have anything. And these guys in FAS are being brought in to do the same job that CIO is supposed to do. So that's been very difficult. And whether it's because ED is upset about 2018, but he's really struggled to ever win back the CIO to that extent. Okay, so the last question is, how does that affect him considering Mugabe is gone? Because the president needs the CIO to serve him on a daily basis. They need to serve him intelligence reports. What credible threats is he facing? Is Chamisa planning anything? What are his plans? Okay, if he wants 2030, where will ED get resistance from? Right now, ED is reliant on the military defense intelligence, on MDI. They are the ones that are really actually doing a proper job. But again, they are not really that loyal to him because he's been after the army for a while. So not having a function, it's like asking how does Trump benefit if the CIA is not fully on board? The president needs the intelligence. He needs CIO to work for him. Their mandate is to protect his interests. I told you, CIO are not a national security organization. It says so in the Constitution. It says so in the law. It does not say so in training, and it doesn't say so in the memo. The first thing a CIO officer is taught is your job is to protect presidential interest, and you must break the law to do so if you can. That's what they're supposed to do. And if they cannot do that, then they can't serve ED. And ED has a problem with that. So I hope that answers you. Right. So it's 22:59. It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much. If I've missed anything, if you've got any additional questions, pop them over on the Dug Up in the inbox, send them to my email. I'm more than happy to continue that conversation with you guys there. It's been incredible. I basically almost don't have a voice, but thank you very much, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. Gonna say goodbye to our TikTok guys. You guys have been awesome. We have been live on TikTok for 1 hour and 59 seconds, almost 2 hours. So thanks a lot, guys. We will see you soon. Okay, guys, so for the guys on the YouTube stream, once again, it was a pleasure having you guys here. I totally enjoyed it and loved it. Until I see you guys again, thank you very much and good morning.